Hello YouTube, how's everyone doing? It's Professional here. So today I wanted to make a video talking about DICE's latest statement about Star Wars Battlefront 2 because recently DICE came out with a statement saying that loot boxes were the rock bottom of Star Wars Battlefront 2, and they admit that loot boxes basically have ruined Star Wars Battlefront 2's reputation. The game is starting to regain its player base. A lot more players are playing the game. The game is pumping out a lot more free content, but DICE, the developers of the game, they recently talked about how loot boxes just really damaged the game, and they're still thinking about what would have happened if EA had not launched Star Wars Battlefront 2 the way they did with the loot boxes. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what happened with the loot boxes, when Battlefront 2 first launched in November of 2017, what happened was the loot boxes were some of the worst loot box systems that I've ever seen in the game. Now, we've covered other loot boxes on this channel. I've covered the loot boxes in Call of Duty, specifically in Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered. In that game, it was just ridiculous with the loot boxes because there were specific guns, DLC guns, that were locked behind the loot boxes, and it took months and months of grinding to finally unlock enough loot boxes in the game without purchasing them just to get the guns that you wanted in the game. And a lot of those guns, they are very powerful, and there's a reason they're very powerful. They want people to buy these loot boxes, so they buy those guns, and so they have them in the game. And the company, Activision in that case, makes plenty of money from it. I know one guy who spent over $200 on loot boxes in Modern Warfare Remastered just because he wanted the DLC guns. Now, in Battlefront 2, what happened was with the beta back in fall of 2017, what happened with the beta was the loot boxes gave you random star cards. And what star cards basically are in this game is they're things like perks. They basically give you certain abilities. There's a tier 1 star card, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4, which is the best one. They're also represented by colors, tier 4 being purple. But these star cards give you specific abilities, and some of these abilities can really help you in combat, and they can make you much more efficient. And basically, whoever had the most amount of these loot boxes got the best star cards, and they could basically destroy everybody else in the match. And you could open up a ton of loot boxes. This is the old loot box system they had. You could open up a ton of loot boxes, and you could get the worst star cards possible. But then somebody just opens one loot box, and they get the best star cards, and they will be dominating. And it was no surprise that the people with the best star cards were usually the people that were dominating matches. Now, this system was changed, but unfortunately, it was really bad at launch. And I remember specifically in Starfighter Assault, it was the worst in that one because the star cards gave fighters such big advantages. It made their lasers do more damage, it made them more agile, it made their health regenerate faster. People who had the best star cards absolutely destroyed everyone in Starfighter Assault, and it still happens today. People with the best star cards are the ones who do better. Now, EA, due to outrage, because people were really outraged when this happened, they changed that years ago. They changed the loot box system. They disabled them for some time, but then they brought them back, and when they brought them back, they're only cosmetics. They're still in the game, but they're cosmetics. You can no longer get star cards from them. And DICE, the developers of the game, they were interviewed about this. Now, DICE, I mean, you could argue, I guess, that they're a little bit at fault for the whole loot box controversy of what happened, but it's mostly EA, the publisher. These are the guys who did the whole thing with the loot boxes, and it's a shame because, you know, I got back into Star Wars Battlefront 2 recently. It's fun. They've been doing a lot of updates on the game, and I enjoy it, but the loot boxes have just taken such a toll on the game's reputation. So let me read this article to you guys, and I'm going to also let you guys know what I think of this, and I'm also going to put this article down below in the description as well as a top pinned comment. So it says here, Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box controversy was DICE's lowest moment. DICE has come out and said that Star Wars Battlefront 2's loot box controversy brought the studio to its lowest point in the eyes of its players. Publisher EA has also expressed regret multiple times in the past 2 years over the game's launch and its egregious mishandling of microtransactions. Now, with EA, they're expressing regret. No, I don't truly believe that they're really sorry. You know what? They're not sorry over what they did with the loot boxes. The reason they're expressing regret is because so many people were outraged and didn't buy the game. They don't care about the whole loot box thing. I mean, they defend these loot boxes like crazy. I mean, if you take a look at some of their sport games like FIFA, the loot box system in there is really bad. I don't play those games, but I've had people tell me that they're really bad in those. And I mean, EA, they refused to call loot boxes loot boxes. I think it was in front of a panel of British politicians where they said that they considered them surprise mechanics, not loot boxes. But anyways, continuing with the read here, the debacle over Battlefront 2's loot box and progression was one of gaming's biggest controversies in 2017. These systems turned the mostly multiplayer game into a pay-to-win scenario. Loot boxes dispensed in-game star cards that granted statistical boosts based on their rarity, while standard progression barely gave anything to players who didn't shell out for loot boxes. I agree with that statement. It was a disaster. When that was with the beta, it was an absolute disaster. Needless to say, the outcry from fans was enormous. So enormous, in fact, that the resulting PR nightmare caused Battlefront 2 to fall short of its sales targets and even impacted EA's stock value. But, despite these outrages, EA has been getting away with stuff like this for years and years. They've been doing things like this. They've been doing terrible things, and there's outrage, but then they end up getting away with it, and then tons of people end up buying their next games, whatever it is. The best way to probably really hurt EA would be to not buy their games, but that itself is pretty hard because EA, they're an absolutely terrible publisher. They're a very terrible publisher. It's one of the greediest companies that I've ever seen, but some of the people that work for them, like DICE, traditionally good developers, they did pretty good with Battlefront 2. I mean, Battlefront 2 was not a glitchy mess at launch. It wasn't a glitchy mess, but it was a disaster at launch because of just the loot box system and just how bad it was. And whenever anybody looks at Star Wars Battlefront 2, they go back and they look at the game, even though the game has not had those star card loot boxes in the game for years now. Whenever people go back and look at the game, they say to themselves, that's the game that had that ridiculous loot box system. I mean, that's what everybody remembers Star Wars Battlefront 2, and that's not a good thing. That has really destroyed Star Wars Battlefront 2's reputation. It's a great game, it's regaining its player base, but on the other hand, even me, I play the game regularly, and when I play the game regularly, I think to myself, I just remember that whole loot box controversy and what happened with it. So it says here, DICE and EA have been cleaning up the fallout from this disaster ever since trying to rebuild some kind of goodwill by addressing the problem, overhauling Battlefront 2's progression system, and continuing to support the game with free and frequent content updates. But the game's problematic launch still looms large in the minds of many fans, and DICE itself is intimately aware of that. I remember when one player on Reddit, he made a post where he talked about how ridiculous it was to unlock Darth Vader as a character in the game and all this grinding, but at the same time, it was that EA responded to the guy and said that we want players to feel pride and accomplishment, and that had the most downvotes in Reddit history, I believe. So you can see people were really outraged for it, and I was very happy. I was very happy with the outrage because people stood their ground, they stood up to EA, and they said, we're not going to tolerate this nonsense. And the problem is that EA has basically a monopoly on Star Wars games because they have a partnership with Disney. Disney said that EA has been a great partner, which I don't understand how they can possibly say that, but hopefully in the future, when EA's contract expires with Disney, you can see other developers independent of EA come out with their own Star Wars games, because right now the two main Star Wars games are Star Wars The Old Republic, which is an MMORPG that's run by EA, and also Star Wars Battlefront 2. EA reflects on Star Wars Battlefront 2's mess and looks ahead to 2019. In an interview with Games Industry Biz during Gamescom, Battlefront 2's design director Dennis Bronval admitted that DICE hit rock bottom in terms of player sentiment after the release of Battlefront 2. Not a week goes by without us thinking, imagine if we hadn't launched with loot boxes the way we did, Bronval said. He went on to imply that if the handling of microtransactions had been better, both the critical and commercial reception of the game would have focused on its content rather than the system that connected it. Bronval says that he and his team would have been in a different place, that's for sure, and that they truly believe Battlefront 2 is a worthy sequel to their first Battlefront game and lives up to the legacy of the Battlefront franchise. So, Battlefront 2 is not a terrible game by any means. I play the game a lot. I wish that they would do a lot of the things from the original Battlefront game. I'm not talking about the 2015 one. I'm talking about the 2005 game. Star Wars Battlefront 2 in 2005. If they took a lot of that stuff from the 2005 game and just put it in the current one, it would be even more of a success. So Battlefront 2, it's in no way a terrible game. I don't really have any problem with bugs in the game. They could add some more gameplay features, but it was just that loot box mess that just hurt the game so bad, and it's been so hard for the game to get back up on its feet because so many people have left the game. And when a game first sells, it's relying on that first month that a game releases is very important for a game's future, because that game builds a player base from that day forward. And that first month, a lot of people refuse to buy Battlefront 2. They refuse to buy it because of the disaster with the loot boxes, and they said to themselves, they're not supporting EA, and, I don't really blame those people. And, now years later have passed, and people have gotten into other games. They're playing other games, they're gotten into other multiplayer games, and either they're not interested in Battlefront 2, or they don't have time for Battlefront 2 because they're playing so many other games. So that first month of games is very important. And I also wanted to mention another game, Fallout 76. Now, Fallout 76, that game has a different mess. It had a different mess. It didn't have really a problem with loot boxes like Battlefront 2, but the game did not live up to expectations, and it was just a glitchy mess at launch. It was a disaster at launch. And Fallout 76, the Bethesda, they are releasing a new expansion for that game, and they are going to be adding NPCs. They're going to be adding NPCs. They're going to populate the whole world of NPCs. They're going to add factions. They're going to add the vault dwellers. They're going to add the raiders. They're going to add so many NPCs to the world, new quests. It's going to be free content. But even after they improve all of that stuff, and I mean, it is a step in the right direction for Fallout 76, even after they improve all that stuff and they make the game playable and they make the game better, people are still going to look back on Fallout 76 and they're going to say, that's the game that had that giant disaster at launch. That's that buggy mess. And people are just not going to be interested in that. So even if a game improves and changes all of its failures, people still look back on that game and they say, that's the game that was a disaster at launch. So let's keep reading here. However, that wasn't planned, and Bronville knows it. He stated that in order to move forward with Battlefront 2, the team first needed to take a step back. It was not completely dissimilar to Rainbow Six Siege, he said. They didn't launch the way they wanted, but now it's doing well, and I think we're on a similar trajectory. Bronville further stated that player engagement with the game is now climbing every month and pointed to all new content for Battlefront 2 in 2019. That's somewhat true. I've been playing the game. The game has had an increase in players, and it's adding more content. I mean, they added more heroes. They've added more locations. I just really hope that they add eras, because, my favorite era personally in Star Wars is the Galactic Civil War. That's my favorite era, and I don't like it how, like, whenever we search for mats, it's randomly, it's either the First Order Resistance conflict, it's the Galactic Civil War, or it's the Clone Wars. I really wish we had a custom timeline search. Like, you want to do battles during the Galactic Civil War, you can. You want to do battles during the Clone Wars, you can. The original Battlefront game had that. They need to add more like that, more variety. But what they're doing right now, they're taking the game in the right direction. It is a good-looking game. I mean, you guys see from the gameplay here, it's very good-looking, very good graphics, pretty fun. The game does have its problems, but it's in no way a terrible game. So it says here, we're delivering more content this year than we did in the first year, which is also a sign of a healthy game. The community is happier than it's ever been, especially with the big announcement at Gamescom. I think we had to take a step back. The team had to look at itself in the mirror a little bit, pick ourselves up from a really rough Christmas for everyone, and then just get back to work. Bronville claims that Battlefront 2 is now a lot of fun, and one could say it's certainly become more fun than when the game launched. Players who stuck with the game despite the overt problems with its story, design, and business model have reaped the benefits of DICE's consistent support. The community around the game is also growing, especially considering the rise of Skywalker and its upcoming release. All things considered, DICE seems to have learned a hard lesson with Battlefront 2 and has taken that lesson to heart and gotten better as a result. I'm really curious about one thing. I'm really curious about how DICE felt about the whole loot box system when it was launching. I mean, there's no way that nobody said that everybody was in complete agreement on that and thought that loot box system was going to be a good idea. Somebody probably said that this is going to be really bad, but then they were probably dismissed by some corporate executive, some guy from EA probably coming in and saying, no, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to shove these loot boxes in, and that ultimately hurt the game. And, this is not the first game that EA has really hurt with their launch. Another game that they really, really hurt was what was it called? Battlefield 4. Battlefield 4, I remember that game. That game came out in 2013, and when that game launched, it was a massive disaster at launch because it was so glitchy, it was so buggy, because what happened was EA pushed for a holiday release. They wanted to release the game before the holidays were here, and they pushed DICE, and they rushed the game out, and because of that, they weren't able to fix the glitches. The game crashed a lot, had a ton of glitches, servers weren't working well. That all ended up being fixed. But on the same note, that really hurt Battlefield 4's reputation. So, and that's not just the only two games that I'm talking about, with Battlefront 2 and Battlefield 4. There's many other games that EA has also hurt and damaged. Just EA is just not a great publisher. They're one of the worst video game companies, if not the worst. I shouldn't even be calling them a video game company because all they are is a publisher. But let me know, what do you guys think of it? Do you play Star Wars Battlefront 2? What do you think of this whole loot box system? Do you think the game is ever going to fully recover? Let me know what you think down below. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. If you're new to my channel, enjoy my content, subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.